Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Chocolate Travels. I'm Joseph Opinto to Our World, and I'm here with Hazel. You know her from Taste with Color. So, hi, Hazel. Nice
Hello,
to meet
lovely
you.
to meet you.
Tell me a bit about yourself. What is it that you do in the chocolate world?
Yeah, so a lot of people don't realize that actually I have a full-time non-chocolate job. So everything I do in the chocolate world is all kind of in my free time, evenings,
Wow,
weekends, annual leave. So it's actually been 10 years that I've been in the craft chocolate industry now, which is really exciting. Um, I'm a full-time food scientist, so I studied a little bit of chocolate while I was studying
amazing.
food science, and that piqued my interest. And then I got really interested in chocolate that tasted different. And the way I describe it is different from your kind of average Kit Kat or, standard candy bars that you get in
Hmm.
the supermarket. I tasted a chocolate coated rum soaked raisin from Hotel Chocolat back in 2008.
Hmm.
And for me, it just tasted so different from your kind of Kit Kat Mars bar.
Mm.
And I got really hooked on Hotel Chocolat and I actually worked for them for a little bit.
Okay.
And then I did get offered to work for them when I graduated. Um, but then decided to focus more on it was more in operations and I was more interested in product development. So I then took a job that had a chocolate laboratory, but also other things. And so
Mm.
I started my career kind of working in lots of different product development, but I was always really interested in chocolate. And I got to dabble with it in my full-time job.
Did you always
And then
love chocolate growing up? Was that sort of
yeah, I did,
your
but it was when
obsession?
I tasted this one from Hotel Chocolat, I was like, wow, this is different.
Mm.
And I think, those products are long gone now, but that was what was kind of eye-opening for me. I could really taste the difference. And it's
Mm.
interesting because it wasn't like a single origin bar, but I could really tell the difference in the flavor compared with, chocolate that I was more familiar with.
Right.
And so I decided I wanted to go on holiday by myself and I didn't want to just hop hostels getting
Mm.
drunk. I wanted to do something a little bit more meaningful. And then I wanted to volunteer somewhere. And I thought, or maybe I'll volunteer on a coffee farm in Colombia or do something food
Okay.
or drink related. And as I was exploring opportunities on these websites about working away or volunteering, um, I found this cocoa farm in Costa Rica and everything aligned. And I ended up spending some time at a company called La Guana Chocolate, which is deep in the jungle in Costa Rica. I took this bus to the middle of nowhere, 3.5 hours into the jungle,
Wow.
and with terrible Spanish, it was quite an experience. But that was my first introduction to
And this
cacao.
was in 2008 or
Well,
2009?
no, actually, 2008 was when I first tasted that
Ah,
chocolate
yes.
that was different, and then I graduated in 2012, and
Okay,
then
okay.
that following kind of December time, it was December
Mm,
2013 that I had started working full time, wanted to go on holiday by
mm.
myself. Always loved Spanish culture, Latin culture, and tropical places. And so Costa Rica was perfect. So December 2013 is when I first went to La Guana and went to this little family run cocoa farm and they made their own chocolates there in the middle of the jungle. And we went and harvested cocoa together and made chocolates together. And we were roasting and winnowing with a
Wow.
hairdryer in the middle of the jungle. And so that was really magical. And that's when I first met cacao in the flesh. And when I sort of say is when my craft chocolate journey truly began.
Mm,
And then when I came back, I set myself the challenge to make chocolate from the bean at home. So this was early 2014. Back then, it was still a newish thing. It's insane how much it's exploded in the last 10 years.
yeah.
And of course, I came across Chocolate Alchemy at the time and had a few contacts like Willie's Cacao, which is a maker here that's based in Devon in southern England. And we did have a chocolate show in London at the time. It's not running anymore, but had some friends, and I started Instagramming my journey with hashtag bean to bar, hashtag chocolate making, hashtag single origin, and through Instagram connected with other people in the industry. And
So
made
were you making your own chocolate at this point at home, trying to
This was like
experiment?
some of my first batches, and I actually got my first beans from eBay.
Oh, wow. I don't even know if people still use eBay, but yeah.
Oh, I love eBay. Honestly, you get so much stuff on there that's really handy.
Did you have the refiner too, or you were trying other ways to make
Yes,
it?
so I wanted to make bean to bar at home with minimal equipment.
Hmm.
And so I used a hairdryer to winnow the classic, and I used like a tin can of food to crush the beans before winnowing,
Okay.
a standard oven at home,
Yeah.
and I used an old floor tile to do the tempering. And then, of course, the refining. Some people do it in a food processor, but you really need a really good refiner to actually get that particle size down to not feel grainy.
Yeah. There's a lot of
So,
people in your shoes who maybe did something like you. They went to Costa Rica and they're like, go home,
yeah,
like, I want to make it. They put it in the food processor and they're like, what's happening? It's not turning
yeah.
into chocolate.
Why is it grainy? Yeah, exactly. So I knew I had to invest in some equipment. And when I Googled it and everything, I came across chocolate alchemy.
Mm.
And I also went to some food events, and I came across Willie Harco Coos, who owns Willie's Cacao, and he told me about this Premier grinder that I could get on Amazon. And at that point, it was like a big secret, which is so funny looking back at how it's
Wow.
exploded now.
Yeah.
And so I bought a Premier grinder for about £150 or something. I still have it. I still have it now,
Yeah. Okay.
and so I did invest in that equipment to then make the chocolate. And I just wanted a small bag of beans, and I wasn't very connected at the time. And my friends in Costa Rica, my new friends in Costa Rica, it wasn't very easy to bring some beans back. I brought back a small amount of beans, but
Hmm.
not enough to actually make a batch.
Right.
And so I thought, oh well, I'll just look on eBay. And then what a really funny story is, actually I connected one of my friends called Dom Ramsey to start making chocolate. He was a chocolate blogger, so we kind of connected through Instagram and met at various chocolate events in London. And he was like, oh, can you tell me, like, send me the link to this machine? And I was like, oh, only if you like do me a favor, like I want this piece of information. um so we had like a swap. He bought that, and he was like, what did you do about beans? And I was like, well, I bought some on eBay actually.
Mm.
He was like, oh, can I buy some from you to get started? And I was like, yeah, sure. And he later went on to win an Academy of Chocolate Award with those eBay beans.
Really? Where did they come from? Do
They
you
were
remember?
from Los Rios in Ecuador.
Oh, okay, okay, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he won a bronze award.
interesting. Would you say now, knowing what you know now, would you say that those beans are actually quite good?
They
Or
were quite good.
yeah,
And
okay.
actually, about 3 years ago, I moved house, bought my first property, and I had a load of stuff at my mum's house. And deep in the back of some wardrobe somewhere were a couple of kilos left of these beans that I'd forgotten about.
Wow.
So I thought it'd be very meaningful to share them with Dom, and he made another batch of chocolate with it. And they were really nice and like coconutty, like no off notes or anything.
Wow.
They were actually some really nice beans. Of course, I would never dream of buying cocoa beans on eBay now, but at that time I was brand new. I
Yeah.
didn't know how. I don't want to buy a 25 or 60 kilo sack. Um, so I just thought, oh, I'll have a look, without thinking about all the ethics and everything. But it's
So
just kind of a
how
funny
old were
story.
those beans that you found that you
Well,
made
they were
chocolate
new
with?
beans. I think eBay has this reputation
Hmm.
where everything you buy secondhand, but everything I buy on eBay is
No, no,
new.
you said that you found them in your wardrobe and you decided
Oh,
to. I'm just
so they were
curious.
from 2014.
Wow. And they still
Yeah,
were okay. That's amazing. Because people always ask, how long can I keep them? And the flavor
yeah,
does change, but you can still use them after a long time if they're
yeah. And
stored
I think
well.
in the beans, is the safest place, because you're protected from oxidation,
Hmm.
whereas cocoa butter goes rancid very quickly because it's most exposed.
Right.
Um, but I think once it's locked in the bean and it's got the shell on it and
And the
it's in a sealed
tannins.
bag,
Yeah,
I think that as long as it's away from oxygen, it can last quite a long time.
that's amazing. Very nice.
So yeah, I started making chocolate, and I started going to events, and it just evolved organically
Mm.
from there.
So what would you say was the driving factor that kept you going? Was it the fact that you tasted this chocolate initially and you thought, wow, this is so different. I want to learn more about it. Or was it the actual making and the process? What was it that really kept you excited about getting into this?
I'd say it's still the things that keep me connected to it now, and it's it's the people. Some of my best friends I've met through chocolate, and whenever I say I hang out with chocolate people, whenever I'm at festivals or I meet up with friends and we taste chocolate, I have the best time, and we connect, and we talk about all other things outside of chocolate. But I
Mm.
think craft chocolate connects the most incredible people because there's not a lot of money in the craft chocolate industry, which is a sad reality. But I think that filters out a lot of people that are in it for the wrong reasons, that kind of
That's a
dream of
good
having an
point.
empire.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like a lot of people in the industry are very passionate and very
Very
generous,
geeky in a way.
open. Yeah, people want to share, and people
Yeah.
really enjoy, connecting, being open, sharing. Can you share this recipe or this? We've got all these community groups, WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups, all sorts, where people are helping each other out. So
Yeah, that's an
there
interesting
is,
point. I wonder if it's because we know in a way it's such a niche and it's a bit fragile in a way too, because
yeah,
so maybe that's why a lot of us want to help each other because we want to keep it going. Maybe that's our way of
yeah,
doing that.
absolutely. Everyone's so passionate. That is the
Mm,
biggest connector. You're in it because you're passionate. And sometimes people have to step down because they're so passionate, but they just can't make it work. They're not kind of
yeah.
into
Yeah.
business. So um yeah.
Okay.
But so it's the people, and then it's also the flavor. What I find fascinating about cocoa is how the flavor can change. Like there is a whole world of flavor within a cocoa bean and within the
Right.
cocoa beans of the world.
Right.
And I find that fascinating, and
Right.
that's the kind of goal of Taste with Color, is to use it as a tool to help people discover this world of flavor, because a lot of people think chocolate is this sweet, milky,
One-dimensional
plasticky thing.
flavor. It's just like
Yeah,
simple.
consistently the same.
And it's not.
And the quickest way I feel to describe it is to say it's similar to the world of wine. You get cherry notes, blackberry, eucalyptus, woody, vanilla, and obviously some have been aged in oak, or there's various different types of fermentation and things, but ultimately it's grapes. And there can be such a variety of flavor within grapes. They've not added cherry flavors or blackberry flavors or lemon or
So
something.
on this note, because this kind of goes into the next question then, and you kind of said it already, but knowing what you know now, how would you explain to someone who has no idea about fine craft chocolate the difference between what we're talking
Mm-hmm.
about and their Cadbury bar, Lindt bar, things like that? What's, something you can say that really would stand out to them?
The main thing to like really distill it down is flavor complexity. So we look for flavor complexity, and you do not get flavor complexity in mass produced chocolate. You get chocolatey notes. Sometimes it's fine. It's eating chocolate. It's chocolate when you need some comfort and you need something sweet and you're craving something sweet. but you're never going to find complexity and something interesting and different. Whereas what's so magical about cocoa is that there's hundreds of flavors within that bean. And what's also really interesting is we all taste differently. And when you make chocolate, you can make chocolate with the same beans in so many different ways because there's all of these different processes that can change the flavor, different percentages of cocoa to sugar, how long you roast it. There's all sorts of things that can change the flavor. And then once you have the same bar, you know, two, three, like you can have a table of 10 people and they all
Yeah.
taste different things as well,
Yeah.
which makes
That's
it a nightmare for standardization. But
exactly.
that's so magical. And it just is, it's like every time I do my workshops, I want to remind people of this because if you say to somebody, what does this taste like? They kind of freeze and think, oh, tastes like chocolate. You know, they're afraid
Yeah,
of saying something wrong, but
exactly.
it's like, actually, we all taste things differently. And what's just fascinating is like 10 people can taste the same chocolate bar and they can all find different flavor notes
Yeah. I appreciate
because
you
it's
saying that because
incredible.
in the wine world and the coffee world, I think there's still this perception that from the general public that there's a right answer. And I feel like in the
Yeah.
chocolate world, I do the same thing as you. You know, I always remind people at the beginning of my tastings, I'm not looking for a right answer. You tell me what it is you're articulating and we'll compare and have fun with that. And a lot of people they don't realize that, you know,
Yeah.
that there is this difference, you know, even with, I'm sure you and your chocolate friends who are, you know, seasoned and know how to articulate, I'm sure you guys disagree sometimes, right? With
Yeah,
the
we
flavors of a
absolutely
bar.
do.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that.
No. And it's just the beauty of being human. It kind of humbles us, you
Mm.
know?
So if somebody, you said to me, you were saying that it's the complexity. Okay. Well, what if somebody says, why should I care about complexity? You know, I like my basic chocolate. Why do I need to look for anything else? You know, why do I need this complexity? What would you say?
You can say that you're allowed to like what you like ultimately is
Mm,
how I would answer it,
mm,
but give it a try,
mm,
because the more we taste better quality things and appreciate them, the more we kind of realize that the lower quality things aren't actually so enjoyable, you know. Like,
mm.
yes, we've all got our guilty pleasures. You know, there's some like mass produced bars that perhaps I will eat occasionally as my guilty pleasure, or like a very sweet craft chocolate bar. You know, I actually have really enjoyed some kind of salted caramelized white chocolates with nibs lately, which is
Right.
not your kind of elegant single origin bar, but we're allowed to like what we like. I just encourage people to try it and see what
Mm.
you find from it,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
also to try and give them the tools to appreciate it, because I think because there's so much flavor happening, when I do these workshops, I give people one square of chocolate, and depending on our preferences and our backgrounds and our flavor libraries, you know, we might all pick out different flavors. Or maybe if I give an example of saying, if you really don't like orange flavor, there might be 100 flavors in this piece of chocolate, but you might be more sensitive to an orange flavor. So you might be like,
Exactly.
oh, it's
Yeah.
really orange for me, whereas someone else might not even detect orange.
Yeah.
So it's like, just give it a try. We all have different preferences, and just see the kind of magic. Like, look at all of these different flavors. And when I get people to paint, it's so exciting to see how, if you give them a piece of chocolate and you just say, oh, what do you taste? They're kind of like, oh, I taste like it's a bit fruity. Like, maybe it tastes like this. But then if I give them this medium of a paintbrush and I sort of force them to do it and go in on themselves, they can spend 5 minutes talking about what they found in this one piece of chocolate. And I think it's that's like giving them a tool to find a way to appreciate it. So you also need to be mindful that when you're sharing craft chocolate, you're doing it in a way that enables people, because people are so used to scoffing chocolate, that if you give them a piece of craft chocolate, they might just chew it and swallow it and be like, oh no, that wasn't very sweet, that was actually quite bitter, if they're used to eating really sweet milk chocolate.
it's kind of like you bringing a friend to an art gallery and maybe you know a lot about the painting on the wall, but they don't know anything. So you appreciate it very much. Once you start to tell them, the artist did this and that's why this is there, then they start to see things they don't even see, right? So it's the same with chocolate is if you don't have the right tools, you don't have the right guidance, they can be eating the same bar, but they're just not getting it. But
Yeah,
once you show them what to look for, how to get it, it becomes a whole new experience. Yeah, that's a really
exactly.
good point.
So, and at the end of the day, if they don't like it, then, I don't believe in forcing anything on anyone. If you don't
Correct.
like it, no worries. Thanks for giving it a try.
Yeah. And that's the thing about fine chocolate is that they didn't like that particular bar. And nowadays there's so many bars and styles and flavors to choose
Yeah.
from. Yeah.
But that actually brings me to an interesting topic I've been debating with people recently
Mm,
is because there's no regulation in craft chocolate. There's a lot of people that unfortunately buy a grinder, chuck some cocoa in it, and bring out some chocolate bars that are not very good.
hmm
And they're not aware of the fact that these bars are not very good. And somebody may come along and taste craft chocolate for the first time in this badly made bar.
mm,
And that's damaging for the whole industry because they might be like, oh, this is craft chocolate. I don't like craft chocolate.
yeah.
Whereas if you're an experienced craft chocolate eater or taster, you would realize, oh no, that's just a bad bar. And so if there's bad bars out there, that can be quite damaging for the whole industry because it can turn people off. And it's the same with anything. Like at work, we were tasting CBD drinks and we were thinking, oh, this isn't very nice. But if it was your first one, how do you know it's a bad version of that kind
Right.
of category?
Yeah.
Or that's what it's representative of the whole category. But you kind of
That's
assume the latter.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And other people have mentioned this idea of more regulation, and I see good in that, but I also see a lot of problems. I feel like it can prevent a lot of people from entering the industry, maybe depending on how it's regulated. But I understand what you're saying, and I've said this as well many times. And I feel, and I'm not going to mention who, but there are even some brands out there that are kind of popular that I think don't do a very good job, don't do the craft chocolate world justice. And in the same way, I find the same thing is like if that's their first experience, that's their only experience, it can turn them off. I understand what you're saying about the regulation. I would push more just us exposing and educating the public, just like pushing that out there, and letting them know if you had a bad one, give another one an experience, give another
Yeah.
one a try and see where that goes. But that's a
Yeah.
really, really good point. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, the only way of technically regulating it is by having awards. If you've never tasted, then maybe you go towards something that's won an award,
Mm,
but that's no guarantee because it could be a different batch that didn't win that award. And there's so many rabbit holes we could go down, but it's just a general thing for introducing new people that I think
right.
I
Right.
don't think there's much we can do about it, but
Yeah.
it's just something to keep an eye on, and it can be something that can
Yeah.
get in the way of recruiting new craft chocolate eaters.
It's definitely something that would be fun to talk about more and more. I'm not a big fan of the awards thing either as sort of a gatekeeper. I think generally there is a lot of truth to it. If you're picking an award-winning chocolate, it should be a certain caliber. But like you said too, I've had bars that they won silver awards, but this batch was awful.
Yeah,
And yeah, that's a tough one. We'll talk about more of that another time. But let's
yeah,
go
that
more
one's there's
into
lots of rabbit holes with awards.
let's go more into your tool. So how did you come up with the taste with color tool? Why deviate from a more traditional flavor wheel, which, coffee is done, wine is done? What's beneficial about what you're doing? How is that helping people?
How's it different? Yeah, so I noticed that when I was doing chocolate tastings with friends, I would speak in colors first. I noticed that colors would come to my mind before flavors.
Mhm,
And in our tasting groups, we had various tools in front of us. We had flavor wheels. Sometimes we had judging guidelines that had some suggested flavor notes.
mhm,
And tasting's very suggestive. So if I say, oh, I taste apple, someone would be like, oh, yes, I taste apple.
mhm,
So having words in front of me would prompt me, and I found that really helpful. But I just noticed that colors would come first, say, oh, this tastes a bit red, and then I get like a hint of green, it finishes with some purple, and there was simply no tool that categorized flavors with colors. The flavor wheels, you might say all fruits are red, but not all fruits are red.
Mhm.
And then
So let me
also
just pause you. When you were saying I'm getting red and I'm getting purple, are you imagining like a red fruit, or you're just color? You're just going by color.
just the color.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah, the colors would just come to my mind.
No
Is
association, just the color. Okay.
Yeah, the
Interesting. Yeah.
colors come first. Is what's really interesting for me. Um, and so and then seeing words written down would prompt me. Um, and so because there wasn't a tool that simply categorized flavors with colors, I decided to create one.
Mm.
And even though I'm a food scientist, it's not technical at all. It's not technical because the IICCT have their flavor profile map that's apparently very technical and
Right.
scientific in how they've created it. For mine, I literally did a watercolor painting, and I did an Excel spreadsheet where I listed common flavor notes that I find from my tasting journey,
Mhm.
and approximately painted those areas, but the brown area is still very busy compared with the purple area, for example, because there's lots of brown flavors that
Mhm.
you would get in chocolate, of course.
Mhm.
Um, so I just did a watercolor painting. The first one was too dark, so I scrapped it. And then I did a second one, and the middle part, and as you can see, it's above my head. The
Mhm.
middle part is actually a bit lighter, and it looked a bit like the shape of Africa,
Mm.
like
I
the
could see
lighter
that.
part.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Um, and so originally I was going to call it the chocolate tasting prompt sheet
It's
because it was a sheet that
not as
has
magical
flavors.
sounding, right?
I know, not so magical. That prompted me, its function was to prompt me because I would go to the green, I would
Mm.
see the flavors
Mm.
associated with green, and it would prompt me to be like, yes, that's what I taste. And that was its function. That's the use of the tool. But then because of this interesting shape of Africa, I was like, oh, it looks a bit more like a map. So I decided to call it the chocolate tasting flavor map, which fortunately sounds a lot better. And I joke that
Mhm.
I don't
Mhm.
work in marketing, but thank God I didn't launch with the prompt sheet.
No.
Um, so I created it to help myself at the end of the day because that's my way of tasting.
Mhm.
And then friends encouraged me to like sell it and see if anybody else tastes that way. And I've had many interesting responses to it. I've had some people say, oh, what is it? Can you explain? I've had some people just say, oh my God, this is amazing. This, like, they have their own ways of using it. Maybe they use it
Mm.
in a slightly different way to me,
Mhm.
but they get it like instantly. And then I have other people that are like, I don't get it. And that's like perfect. That's a representation of the, again, of we're humans, we all do things differently. And I just say to
Right.
people, try it. If it doesn't work for you, put it down, try
Mhm.
something else. And
Mhm.
that's, I think, how we should always approach life. We're all different for a reason, and life would be very boring if we're all the same. So I create it for myself. It works for me. Some people use it differently. Some people don't see the colors first, but they
Mm.
still find it helpful because it simplifies things. And that's also another helpful sort of a thing about it, is that people feel intimidated when they're tasting. They're shy to share
Yeah.
what they taste because they
Yeah.
don't want to be wrong.
Yeah.
But colors, there's, many colors, but there's hundreds of flavors you can associate with certain colors.
Right. Right.
So it simplifies it, and people can just like point to areas of the map to say, oh, I taste this,
Mhm.
I get something around here, or I get
Yeah.
something around here.
And that's sort of what I do in a way is I talk when I get a group, I talk about parallels. If there's something fruity, somebody says cherry, plum, cranberry, and I bring it for and I and I write it down, I like see you guys are all in the same area, kind of like with your color map is people might have a different specific word, but they're in that region. They're paralleling each other. And I think that gives them a bit more confidence, to
Yeah,
know that, there's a bit of individuality, but they're still sort of on the same track. They understand each other a bit more. And that's very helpful, I think. Yeah. So yeah, it's beautiful to look at. I see a lot of makers are proudly put it all over their walls when
uh,
they open up their shops. So it must feel really
thank
good
you.
to know that you're helping a lot of people feel more confident with their tasting
It's
skills.
yeah, it's amazing. It's very unexpected, but it's very heartwarming to see how it helps people and that people like to run their own tastings with it. Ultimately, the goal is to make craft chocolate more approachable for people. And I designed it originally to help myself, and the fact it helps other people is amazing. I don't think I'm going to help in cacao genetics or chocolate making, but I just want to recruit more people to taste craft chocolate, and ultimately, recruit them as buyers and investors in craft chocolate because that's what everybody needs.
So this idea of making chocolate and tasting more approachable, in a way, it's a bit different than what coffee and wine are doing.
Generally, chocolate's more approachable to people because it's more affordable. Anyone can eat chocolate versus coffee. I mean,
Mm,
obviously, more people can drink coffee than people who can drink wine, perhaps,
mhm,
younger.
mhm,
I'm trying to think of like groups of people that don't consume them, but I used to love drinking coffee, but I've unfortunately had to stop drinking coffee because my
mm,
body can't handle it. So I feel like chocolate's more like probably got the widest demographic, which naturally makes it more approachable. Um, and I think it's all just down to marketing that,
mm,
there are some people that want to make chocolate appear more luxury, and
mhm,
there are craft chocolate brands doing that.
mhm, mhm.
Um, like Toac, for example,
Right.
they've now created some bars that are more in line with your average craft chocolate price, but they've created bars for the luxury market, and they're doing that. And um, so I don't think it matters so much. Well, there's such a key difference industry wise. I think it's more just chocolate's generally more approachable to people because kids can't drink wine, and it's also cheaper than getting a really great craft chocolate bar
Mm,
is cheaper than getting a really great bottle of wine. And then coffee, I'm not sure about, to be honest. I think it's just the nature of the people in the industry.
mm.
um, Chocolate is kind of less pretentious because there's not so much money in it. I think it's that.
That's a good point too. Interesting.
But I do hope that Taste with Color could expand into other areas. I've used it doing coffee
Mm,
tastings a few
mm,
years ago.
mhm,
I did a wine tasting course, and I drafted a wine taste with color map.
mhm.
But I just have so many like projects on the go. It's just never could never come
Yeah,
back up to the top of my priorities. But
yeah.
like, I would love to do taste with color with wine one day. Um, I think
No,
it's
I
just about
think,
price points, really.
yeah, and I think that's a good idea too, what you're doing with the coffee and even the wine is that there's people who want to get into it, but always feel intimidated. And so if there's people like you finding different ways to get them in there, I think they would really appreciate that. So, do you know of any, since your background is a nutritional science, have you come across any science behind associations with color and flavor? Anything like that?
Yeah, so there is. I did originally think that taste with color was synesthesia, which sounds really cool. But it turns out it's not because somebody who is in the research field of expertise within that told me it's not.
Mm,
Um, there's loads of really interesting sensory science out there that's not specific to chocolate.
mhm, mhm,
Um, but what I've heard, like I do find it fascinating how the names of words there's this concept about bubba and kiki that you would expect if something was called bubba, it would be rounder and softer and
Mm,
sweeter
hmm.
in flavor, whereas kiki might be sharper in appearance and more acidic and harsher. So there's lots of sensory science that kind of look at those sorts of things. And
Mm.
I mention some of those concepts when I'm doing my workshops about how appearance can affect you, and like color and shapes and all of those sorts of things.
Yeah.
But related to taste with color, it's actually called cross-modal correspondence, which doesn't really roll off the tongue as much. I mean, synesthesia is not the easiest word to say,
No.
but cross-modal correspondence is a little, doesn't sound so sexy, right? So anyway, synesthesia is apparently the more abstract. So it's the association of two senses. So maybe you associate colors with days or numbers or like music and taste and smell, but it's more abstract, is what I'm
Mm.
told. So you might associate cherry with blue and lemon with brown or something. Is how I understand it. I'm
Okay.
not an expert in that area, but that's what I'm told. Whereas my sort of approach is cherry is red, lemon is yellow,
Mm.
cocoa is brown. There is an association with the flavor and the color of the flavor in its natural form
Hmm. Hmm.
or in its most common form. So I
Mm.
always talk about vanilla is an exception
Mm.
because vanilla pods are dark brown, but I associate vanilla more with a kind of creamy color or maybe a light brown color like the vanilla extract. But
Right.
vanilla is associated with ice cream and yogurt and, lighter color products,
Hmm.
vanilla cake and everything like that. But generally there's a correspondence of two modalities. It's the color and the flavor. And so that's the sort of scientific approach of what taste of color is. I didn't realize until years later and that it wasn't synesthesia, and I then updated my website. But it's an interesting concept. And
Yeah.
then, there's
Yeah.
more science in the cross-modal correspondence where you can associate um, images as well. So I also, when I'm doing my workshops, talk a little bit about texture. I mainly focus on flavor with taste of color, but we talk a
Hmm.
bit about
Hmm.
texture. And if you see like a really glossy picture, you think it's really creamy and luscious and smooth.
Yeah.
And then if you saw a picture of some sand, you would think it's grainy, sandy. And
Hmm.
then if you see some kind of like a blobby kind of picture, you think, oh, maybe it's like a bit like waxy
Mm.
or kind of can't think of the words now, but a bit kind of sticky and not like luscious and smooth and creamy, but a bit like
Hmm.
sticky and
Hmm.
a bit
Hmm.
cloying's the word I was thinking
Mm.
of, and like oily and stuff. So you can have these different associations. And then there's also a wine brand that has got faces on all of their wines, and they're all family members, and there's a cross-modal correspondence there with the
Mm.
personality or the face of the person and the flavors in the wine.
There's another study which you probably read about where they were doing both music and shapes in chocolate. And same thing, people were, if the chocolate was sphere, they said it was creamier and sweeter than if it was angular in a square shape or
Yeah.
something like that. The why behind it, I don't think we know yet why that is, but that's the fun part. Uh,
Yeah.
how do your painting and tasting workshops work? So are people, I think you kind of mentioned this earlier, but let's just go over it again. Are people able to express flavors more easily when they're painting than using words? And, if so, why do you think it's difficult for us to articulate with words?
It's difficult for people to associate out of lack of practice.
Mm. Yep.
I think is the simple answer to that. People
Hmm.
just don't practice. um I
Such a
obviously
good point.
practice a
Yeah.
lot for my day job, and often I'm tasting with people, and I will say a flavor, and they're like, "Oh yeah, and how do you get that?" And when people ask, "Oh, do you have were you born with like a special palate? Like, no, it's just experience. If you want to get better at tasting chocolate, eat more chocolate. It's as simple as that. Practice, taste, and another thing that people can do to help is taste lots of other things. Build your flavor library.
Exactly. When you're in the kitchen, you're cooking, do weird things like smell the vegetables, smell the fruit, and that just reminds your brain,
Yeah,
right, of all these things.
absolutely. And you can only get better with practice. And recently I did a sensory training at work where we zoned in on gingers and ginger notes,
Mm,
flavor notes that you get in ginger products. So I got some soap and I broke up some soap and put that in there because you can get soapy notes. I got some mixed sweet spice. I got some chocolate.
mm,
I got some fresh ginger. I got some dried ginger. I got some soil from a plant pot for earthy. I got some lemongrass. I got some grass from outside the office and put it in a pot for green grassy notes. I got some cleaner and put it in a pot because when these oils oxidize, they smell like cleaner. And
mm.
we were then tasting the products and we were saying, oh, I get a lot of sweet spice with this. And we went back and smelt the sweet spice, say, oh yeah, I picked that out. And so you need to just taste and practice. I mean, there's
Yeah.
hundreds of flavors. Like, how do you know what it tastes like until you taste that note individually?
Yeah. No, I'm glad you said that. That's a really good point. And also the fact that I think we trust our memory when it comes to flavor and aroma too much, you know?
Mm,
Whereas sometimes, you're like, oh, I think I taste this, I think I taste this. But then if you remind yourself, like if you have all those little samples there and like, actually, it's not quite this, it's more like this. And so I think, like you said, it's practice. It's also just in your recent memory. The more you have in your recent memory, the more you have to pick from when you're
yeah,
analyzing and tasting. And no, I'm glad you said that's a really good point. A lot of people in the world still have this perception. It's like either you're good at tasting or you're bad. And
yeah,
it's like saying you're either good at playing piano or you're bad. Nobody was born, maybe one, two people, but like most people aren't born to just understand notes and all of a sudden start playing. It's very rare. Most people have to practice and practice, right? Train your ear, just like you were
exactly.
saying,
You
train your
get better
palate.
by practicing.
Yeah.
I've I've become well experienced in tasting chocolate because I have a lot of experience. I've eaten and tasted a lot of chocolate,
Yeah.
and that's
And not
how
just
I've
tasting it, but like articulating it, right? Paying attention.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Tasting it, articulating it, writing it down. And so your question about like, is it easier saying it or how does it work when it comes to the painting? Often I have people come to tastings and say, I'm not a good taster. And I correct them to be like, no one's a bad taster. There's no right or wrong. We all taste differently. And I really, really kind of push that message because I want people to leave feeling more empowered to be like, oh no, I can taste, but so many people tell me I'm not very good at tasting.
Yeah.
So I really want to kind of undo that message for people. People also panic when they see paints and paintbrushes.
Oh, really?
They say, oh, I can't paint. I'm not a good painter. And again, I make a bit of a joke about that and really drill that message in to say, if you can pick up a paintbrush, put it in paint and put it on the paper, you can paint. Okay.
Right.
Because I'm like, who here can paint? And nobody puts their hand up, or maybe one person puts their hand up. And most adults come in and they've not picked up a paintbrush in 20 years or something. So
Yeah.
they freak out, which is quite funny. But we make a bit of a joke about it. And also, again, I just want them to feel a bit comfortable. And if I have time, I get them to do a bit of a warm up,
Mm,
just to kind of be like, look, it's okay. You can paint and it's okay. And it doesn't have to be a masterpiece. It's just about expressing yourselves. And sometimes I get people who paint something and I'm like, oh, what flavor did you get there? Or what did you get for this color? And they were like, I don't know, but I just got it. Like, and maybe they can't articulate what they tasted, but they
right.
still painted something with many colors and shapes. And that's what the chocolate communicated with them. But then they still don't have that like language and experience to actually articulate it in
Hmm.
words. It's
Hmm.
quite interesting.
Yeah. I'm curious because when I do my tastings, I use mostly words, and so I parallel, the words. Do you ever find that the paintings at the end of the class do you find like some are very similar and then some are like completely opposite? Yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah, I have had some workshops where they're very similar. I actually have got some framed. Shall I run and get it? Let
Sure.
me.
Yeah.
My first workshops. I remember feeling so anxious about it because I was like dreaming that people would leave and be like, "We don't get it," which is so funny. And people kind of forget that if you come across like quite confident in your pictures or something, I'm like, no, I still get very nervous.
I do too. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
funny. Yeah.
people kind of are like, no. I'm like, yeah, I still get nervous. I mean, that was like from some of my initial ones.
Yeah.
But this is my favorite example.
Mm.
Probably can see your own reflection in
Yeah.
there.
No, I can see. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is my favorite example, and I actually got my mum to frame it for my birthday. Um, I did this tasting. It's this bar no longer exists actually, so it kind of makes it even more precious.
Mm.
But what I love about it is that I love doing workshops where there's color on the packaging. So I really like using chocolate tree. And they have got these yellow, orange, and red lemurs because it's a Madagascar bar.
Mm.
They no longer make it. And I always do my tastings blind if I can, where I give them the chocolate, I don't tell them anything else.
Yeah.
And then at the end, we ask questions like, what percentage do you think it is? Do you like what origin do you think it is?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then show them the packaging at the
Mm-hmm.
end. And what I loved about this is that I have so many of, if you look at, the colors on here, so many of
That's
them
amazing. Yeah.
match.
Yeah.
And so when I presented the packaging at the end,
That's so cool.
uh, you could see, yeah, there's some green and there's some
Mm-hmm.
purple
Mm-hmm.
as well. But
There's a
this
lot of
is like my
consistency.
favorite
Yeah.
representation. Yeah. And I'm
Yeah.
like, you nailed the packaging, guys.
That's really cool. No, and it's
Yeah,
funny too, even in my tastings when we're describing with words, a lot of people, parallel each other, but then there's always like usually always one or two people that get the complete opposite, something totally
really.
different. And I still can't explain it. But and you see that in the painting you just showed me. There's that one person that got a lot of green. Some people didn't get any
Yeah.
green at all. So that's amazing.
I mean, the more complex a bar, the more diverse it's going to be.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I often do tastings where we get all the colors, we tick all the kind of major categories of flavors. We get earthy, we get spicy, we get fruity, we get herbal, we get floral, kind of get all the major categories. And I just say, look, this is a message that this is a complex bar of chocolate, and we all taste differently, and we all pick out different things. But the overall message is like, wow, how complex is this bar? We get all these flavors. There's different ways of describing it. We have like a flavor journey. We have a rainbow of flavors. We have recently I met with a friend, Victoire, who owns La Chocologue in Paris,
Mm.
with my friend Susanna from Ecuador, who I know you just interviewed.
Ah, yes, yes.
So we went to visit Victoire, and she was saying that she uses a melody of flavors, which is like another beautiful way of describing it, a rainbow, a flavor journey, or a melody of flavors.
Mm.
And that's all just ways of saying that this is the complexity in the bar. But it is really exciting. Like, it's really satisfying when you get an example like this one and you see the similarities. And what is even
Yeah.
more satisfying is when it matches the bar. So I have got a couple where Soma, in from Canada,
Hmm.
they really like watercolor. So we connected with like chocolate and tasting and watercolor. And I used their bars at the Craft Chocolate Experience in San Francisco just before the world shut
Mm.
down in
Um,
2020. And they paint usually influenced by the origin, so like the rivers and
mhm,
the
mhm.
um, and I did a tasting with two of their bars, and there were some paintings that were really similar. There were some, that were all sorts of colors, but
Right.
then there were like a handful of paintings that were really similar to their packaging, and I
That's
just
so
find that
interesting.
so satisfying.
Huh, very cool. I'm glad you shared that. That's really nice to know. So, what do you feel pulls people into fine chocolate? What would you say really draws, from your experience, what draws them into it? Or is everybody different?
So I think, and probably everybody's different. I think
Mm,
everybody's got a different story. There are a lot of people I meet at tastings that aren't interested in making, but just interested in tasting.
mm,
I'd say most often it seems to be that they are interested in the food or drink industry,
mm,
and maybe they've stumbled upon a bar. There's people that were really interested in making bread, and then they stumbled across the bar, and then they were like, oh wow, this is really interesting, and then they kind of went for a deep dive. um, so I think that's probably most common, but there's also people with all sorts of random reasons of how they
mm,
got into craft chocolate. It was given as a gift, or they had a corporate event at work, um, or just happened to walk past a chocolate festival or something. So I think there's a variety of reasons, but I think what lures people in is like they have to have some sort of interest or like geekery
mm,
about it, you
mhm,
know?
mhm. And when it comes to your tasting experiences, you've done many, are there people who, because I've experienced too, where a lot of people walk away like this was amazing, I learned so much. But sometimes you get people who's like, I didn't like any of this, it didn't meet their expectations. They had something in mind. Have you had that experience? And if so, do you want to give us an
Yeah,
example?
fortunately, more often than not, it's a positive
Yeah.
experience. I have had times where the bars have been just too dark for some people, and
Mm,
they're like, they still pick flavors out and stuff, but perhaps they didn't like any of the bars because they were
right.
just too dark for them, and they're just not used to it. Um, and you're always going to have some people that to be honest, I think people that don't get much don't usually say much. It's normally the people who get really excited will wait for me at the end and then ask me a load of questions that I probably don't know, like the reasons why anyone doesn't necessarily enjoy it or
Mm,
isn't interested in making craft chocolate, because they wouldn't want to come up to me and
mm,
talk to me or tell me about
right,
it.
right.
So I probably don't have an accurate kind of data point for that to answer that accurately.
Yeah. No, it's just curious because I think, sort of like craft beer and other, fine foods, people, especially, I'm sure true in UK, but in Canada and the States, there's this sort of mainstream food that's just very sort of simplistic and bland that most people consume. And when they try foods that have actual interesting flavors, they're just not used to it, and it
Mm-hmm.
kind of throws them off. And I did a tasting recently, and usually I ask people at the end, how would you describe now that the difference between, fine chocolate, craft chocolate, and industrial chocolate? And usually the answers are sort of what I want to hear or expect to hear. But then one lady once was like, well, I don't like fine chocolate. That's what I was like, okay, interesting. It just didn't hit her expectations. I think some people, they come into it and they're like, this is high-end chocolate. So it's going to be like the best of the best, like super creamy, super nutty, super maybe, things like
Sweet.
Nutella and yeah, sweet. And it's just none of that sometimes, So yeah, it is
There will always
interesting.
be those people, and I think
Yeah,
our message just has to be thank you for trying, and like,
of course. Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, yeah,
I'm glad they came, but it's always funny to me too.
I know.
When you hear that, you
I
just have to
do
keep
get ones that make me
smiling.
laugh.
Like, oh, you hated all of it. Okay, that's great.
I'm sorry.
It's all good. From your experience, what would you say is preventing or stagnating the growth of the bean to bar sector? Maybe you disagree with that statement, but do you think there's anything kind of slowing it down? Something that could be better?
Well, I guess I'll start off by saying I don't think I'm the most qualified person to answer, because I don't sell my own chocolate or make my own chocolate.
Right.
It's more, and I also do have a full-time job, which means I'm not 100% in on the industry to watch what's going on. But from what I've seen over the years, I think that it's exploded in terms of number of makers, but there's many, many makers also stepping down. And when I speak with other makers, I don't think anybody's like doing super, super well. I think it depends on a lot of situations. There's a
Mm.
lot of external uncontrollables happening in the world,
Hmm.
which all have
Hmm.
an impact.
And that's kind of food industry business in general. Not everyone's
Yeah,
going to make it.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
those are more general things. But I think the most challenging thing with craft chocolate, um, what's kind of preventing it from growing so much is its price point. So it's it's such a challenge. It's been the challenge from the very beginning, from when I first entered, but it's such a sticking point. And the way I explain it is that a cup of coffee, you can get a cup of coffee from McDonald's for £1 or $1.50 or something. And it might be at single origin, which doesn't really mean a lot, does it? For coffee, it's what they mean. It's from Brazil or Colombia, the two biggest producers of coffee. Um, but it could be a drinkable cup of coffee,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Um, and then if you want to have a nice specialty coffee that's like been roasted by a particular roaster and is from a particular farm, and you have it brewed like a V60 or something. In London, maybe that they would charge you like £4.50 or £5, which is sort of 4 or 5 times the price, perhaps, versus like your cheapest cup of coffee that you can get, like a
Hmm.
£1 cup of coffee.
Hmm.
I don't think it's even £1 anymore. So maybe you can say like, or if you get a standard cup of coffee, it might be like £2 to £3. So you're kind of looking at three-ish approximately times the price
Hmm.
to have your average, maybe 5 times for the cheapest, um, to have your more fancy speciality type.
Hmm.
With craft chocolate, you have companies like Lindt, for example. They have gold on the packaging. People think it's premium because there's gold on the packaging. You see these adverts with these fancy chef hats. Their marketing shows it's premium. And it might be £1.50 for 100-gram bar in the supermarket. Whereas craft chocolate, you're looking at least £6 for maybe 50 grams. So it's like the difference is so much greater, like the investment and the jump up. It's not just, oh, I'm going to spend double today and have a
Yeah.
nicer coffee. It's such an uphill kind of struggle. It's
Yeah.
such a reach that people just aren't willing to go from £1.50 on their Lindt to £6 on half the volume. You're kind of looking at like over 10 times the
Hmm.
price
Hmm.
ish, like for investment. um and that is such a struggle. I share chocolate all the time. I have a bag of chocolate, I've got these lovely bags from Guatemala, and I have a bag of bars in my bag whenever I'm in the office. Whenever I go and meet anyone, I always carry a bag of bars with me
You must be
and
very
do some
popular.
tasting. Yeah, it's a good way to make friends when you're traveling, actually. Um, And I always share chocolate. I spend so much money on chocolate, and I always share it because I want people to experience it and invest in it as well. And I will often do like a little afternoon. People come to my desk. Oh, what's this you're trying? I'll share some samples with a few people around me. Oh,
Mhm.
wow, that's really nice. What is it? Yeah. And then I'm like, yeah, so it's like £6 a bar. They're like, oh
Mm.
my God, like, no, that's too much money. And I'm like, you just said you loved it.
Right.
Even when people love it, it still feels so alien to them to
Yeah.
spend that much money on chocolate.
Yeah.
And I've experienced it so many times.
Yeah.
And that is what I feel is the biggest barrier. Because if nobody's buying it, nobody's selling it,
Yeah. Because when it comes to, find, alcohol's a bit easier. Alcohol, especially wines, people buy them as gifts and they want to spend more because it feels better to do so. But even if you're buying like, locally made high-end bread or cheese, people are willing to spend a bit more for the high quality. But there's still this mental idea of what chocolate should cost, and it's challenging for a lot of people to get past that. And
It is.
I think like you said, that's what I think as the industry we need to tackle more in more approachable ways and more fun ways and just get that out there to have people really understand the price points, without shaming, without making them feel guilty, anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But like really truly understand the price, because that really is, like you said, I think it is the number one barrier for getting more people.
Yeah.
Because
And it's
people who
it's
already
hard
like us and they love it, we don't mind spending, on the good chocolate that we love. But it's
because
if
it's our
you
passion, right?
exactly,
People who are
exactly.
passionate about clothes, for example, they spend loads of money on clothes. Like I don't spend loads of money on clothes or makeup or, I spend my money on chocolate because
Yeah,
it's my passion.
yeah,
So it's hard for the people who it's not their everything, it's not their passion.
exactly.
We need to find a way to recruit these people who are interested, or
Hmm.
who want to try it from time to time. um
Yeah,
it just seems so foreign for them because ultimately, like, we've been conditioned that these are the price points for chocolate, and when it's advertised as kind of premium with gold on the packaging or fancy, the marketing is showing that, different from your kind of average dairy milk bar or something.
hmm,
um it People just can't get past that, and that's the challenge. It's
yeah,
such a challenge.
yeah. I think maybe that's something we could talk about another time and just stick to that because there's
Mm,
so much we can say.
yeah.
Ethics is closely tied to bean to bar.
Hmm.
Can you have fine bean to bar chocolate without ethical sources? Do they have to go hand in hand? Because a lot of people come to me and ask those questions, about ethics and fair trade and all that sort of thing. And what would you say about that? Do they have to go hand in hand?
I think they naturally come hand in hand. Um, I think quality is reflected in products that are made with love, which might sound a bit cheesy, but I think you can really taste the difference. Like, I'm actually on a bit of a health journey now where I'm investing in better quality food and I'm eating more kind of organic and better quality food, and I can taste the difference so much, and I feel like when you taste the difference, it must have come from a better ethics and,
Mm,
better care, is my personal view. And I know that you can have all these certifications with ethics as well, which is probably a dangerous subject to go down. And again, I don't feel like I'm qualified to kind of talk about that. I've never worked with fair trade or any of these. But what I do know is that there can be very ethical, organic cocoa that goes into, these really nice tasting bars, but they don't have the certifications because it's so expensive to get all of these certifications, and there's always loopholes and there's always ways of getting around stuff as well. That I think a lot of craft chocolate is organic, and is ethical, but they don't have all of these big corporate certifications with them because you have to produce certain volumes and pay a lot of money to get to be able to make these certifications. So I think ultimately you can taste it. And I think if cocoa hasn't been treated ethically and with love and care, you can probably taste it in the final bar. So I think they naturally come hand in hand.
Yeah, I think into today, where we are today and what I know about the makers and their sources, naturally right now it does seem to go hand in hand. You can't really have an incredible, we would call an incredible bar without it coming from a very transparent source and whatnot.
Well,
Because
you
a lot
can
of,
get some bad bars. just to kind of fill that whole go full circle there, but there can be bad bars made with good ethical cacao.
yeah,
But I don't think you can do it the other way around. Like, I think it's quite unlikely to have an amazing bar that isn't kind of taken care of, you
yeah.
know.
And there's talk about the certifications. There's a lot of certified organic fair trade chocolate that is simply using bulk cacao. It's
Yes.
nothing special. It's not synonymous. So people always ask me all the time, what is your favorite bar, brand, cacao origin? I hate this question, but I am gonna ask you.
Yeah.
So do you like these questions? Did you want to answer any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously get asked a lot as well. Like, often it's what's the best bar, and I'm like, there is no best bar.
Yeah.
That's the most annoying question, is
Yeah.
what is the best bar? What's the best chocolate?
Yeah.
I find that annoying because I'm like, it's so subjective. Like, what do you like? But favorites, I do like that question actually, because it's
Mm,
interesting for me to reflect and think which
mm,
bars stood out for me, which bars did I enjoy this year. And actually, I think it was in 2022, like last year was just a very busy year for me, that I didn't get a chance to do it. But in 2022 there was one bar that stood out for me in particular, and it was this tonka bean and sour cherry bar with cocoa camille tanzania cocoa,
mm. I
made by
love
chocolate
tonka
card.
bean. That sounds really
I
good.
love tonka as well. It's quite divisive though. So
Weird.
some people really don't like it. I think it's magic. It's kind of got a
Yeah.
sandalwoody element to it. I just think it's
It's so
really,
comforting. Oh,
yeah, I think it's very special flavor. I really like it. Some people hate it.
hmm.
But the flavor of this, like sour cherry and tonka, anyway, that
Mm,
bar really stood out to me.
mm,
And I just, on social media, I just post things as and when they come up. I don't really plan anything.
mm.
Because I know there are a few other kind of chocolate people that like, here are my bars of the year
Right,
and this
right.
kind of thing. I'd love to be a bit more organized, but I'm not, because like life happens, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and so that bar just stood out to me, and I posted it saying like, this was my favorite bar of the year. But I think it's more like, what are your favorite bars of the moment? I don't
yeah,
have
yeah,
a favorite bar ever.
yeah.
I have these favorite bars of the moment, and I actually wanted to post about my favorite bars of last year. Um, and what's quite interesting is the mix. And even though I have taste with color and I talk all about the complexity of flavor within single origin craft chocolate, I tend to prefer flavored bars,
Oh no.
like for my own consumption,
Yeah.
which I feel is, you know, a bit
Sacrilege.
naughty. Yeah, I kind of, probably shouldn't shout about that, but it's the just, I do
I go
tend to
through
lean,
phases. Sometimes I'm like, no, I
yeah.
just want the simplicity of single origin. And then sometimes I just can't help myself with these flavored bars. And sometimes I go into the whites, and I'm like,
Yeah,
what am I
I do
doing
too. So if
here?
you think about it, some of my favorite bars of last year, um, I went to Ecuador in January and visited a lot of makers. And there was actually this white chocolate bar that they made in 200-gram blocks. And it was actually more of a mass produced cocoa manufacturer that sell butter, and they sell
Mm,
and various other things. But they made this white chocolate that was underodorized butter with some salt and with some actual Ariba Nacional nibs on top.
mm,
And it was so addictive. And I love that combination of
mm,
white chocolate, salt, and nibs. There's
mm.
just something about it. Like, the salt helps balance the sweetness. Um, and like the nibs help balance the kind of sweetness as well. And there's something like really addictive about that. And
Yeah.
I'm not ashamed to admit that I enjoy that. And then I also tasted a caramelized nib white with salt from
Mm,
again Choco Card. I
mm,
never would have even tasted it. I wouldn't, if I went to a stand and they had 20 bars, I would
yeah,
never pick it out.
right.
But we actually went to visit them and I tasted it. I was like, okay, this is like what I call inhalable bars, where I
I was just
just
gonna say, yeah,
eat the whole thing
yeah,
in one go.
yeah.
So I really like those. But then, what also stood out to me last year was this chili flavored bar from Mexico by Echa. And they had two different dried chilies in there.
Mm,
I think pasilla and a mulatto chili. And what I loved about it was that you can taste the flavors of these kind of smoky, interesting, fruity, like dried fruit, raisiny chilies, and
yeah,
like the savory notes with it, and that bell pepper note, without having like just the heat. Because there's so many bars that chili is just about spice, but there's so many beautiful flavors within chili,
yeah.
and it paired really well with the chocolates. Like that was another favorite bar. And one of my all-time favorites is the Fruition, I think 42 or 43% brown butter milk.
Okay.
That's an exceptional bar. Like it's exceptional. I mean, there have been a few single origin bars that I've eaten that I have finished. And do you know what? Quite often it's a Maya Mountain Belize.
Ah,
I really like that cacao, and I
yeah,
quite like
yeah.
tasting. Some people have made bars with my Mountain Belize, or like there's been some Colombian ones, and actually there was I guess technically it's flavored because it had honey, but there was
Mm,
a chocolate Madagascar 85% made with honey that I also loved,
mm.
which it didn't taste massively of honey, but there still are some single origins that when they really nail it, it is becomes an inhalable one.
Wonderful. Do you have any pet peeves about various things you hear or read about in regards to bean to bar chocolate? Some myths that you like to debunk, anything like that?
Yeah, I have one particular pet peeve.
Okay.
I wonder, can you guess what it is? Or
I
is
don't
it
know. Can you give me a
commonplace?
hint? I don't know.
Um, it was got like a health halo.
Health halo. You mean like the antioxidant and
Well, it's
superfood?
it's raw.
Ah, okay. Okay,
Raw
okay.
chocolate is
So
like
let's talk
like
about that. That's always a contentious issue. I see some very, not you, but like on Instagram, you see some very angry people sometimes talking about raw chocolate. So
I
what is
know.
it?
I'd rather keep Instagram like a clean place personally. I like if I have something negative to say, I'd rather not say it.
Right. Fair
But
enough.
um raw chocolate is just is a bit of a pet peeve
Mm.
because I think people
First of all,
use
define what raw chocolate is for people that don't know.
well, raw chocolate does not exist, first of all, is in my opinion. I mean, you can technically get raw chocolate if you don't ferment the cocoa beans and you decide to turn it into chocolate, but that's not really going to taste good. I
Mm.
know there are the odd experiments, looking at unfermented bean chocolate and making it truly raw, but I mean, generally speaking, you're not going to find, like, if you make chocolate with unfermented beans, it's not going to taste good.
Yeah.
So technically, people think raw chocolate is where you have beans and you don't roast them and you make it into chocolate. But there are, I think, various definitions of what raw is, certain temperatures that it needs to be below. And I think during fermentation, those temperatures are exceeded. So even if you make chocolate with unroasted beans, those beans have already been subject to temperatures higher than like technically they say for
Mm.
raw. And there might be a range of temperatures, so I don't want to quote them,
Right,
but
right.
that's what I understand. I think fermentation can go up higher than what people claim to be the
Okay.
raw
So your first
temperatures.
pet peeve is that it doesn't fall under what most define as raw food, right? That's what you don't
That's
want.
the first thing, is like the technical piece. I
Okay.
also just massively disagree with not roasting cocoa as well, from a flavor standpoint and from like a micro safety standpoint,
Mm.
because cocoa beans are not clean. They have been fermenting, there's a lot going on there. And when they're dried, various things can happen in the atmosphere. Sometimes,
I
you
think
know,
that's a good point generally, because the way we know the way cacao is, fermented and dried, it's usually in, huge batches and they're not looking at everyone. But let's say somebody, lives in Hawaii and they got a few cocoa pods and they fermented and dried their own on their balcony, you know, would that still be an issue from a health point of view as far as microbes and unsanitary
I
standards?
think so, because it's like raw fruit, and things like to grow on raw fruit.
Mm.
You might get flies
Mm.
coming from the atmosphere and
Hmm. Hmm.
going to the raw fruit, and
Okay.
who God knows what's on these flies.
Right.
So I don't you could perhaps do a very controlled way if you really wanted to, but generally
That's
speaking,
not how it's done. Yeah.
yeah, generally speaking, it's not done like that. But also there's this kind of world of flavor that happens during roasting. And I think that there's all these flavor precursors that are sitting in the beans once they've been fermented. And if you don't roast them, they're just sitting there. Whereas when you roast them, all these chemical reactions happen and all this
Hmm.
incredible flavor is produced. So I feel like you're also missing out on flavor.
Yeah.
And I understand that, maybe you want a lighter roast for
Hmm.
whatever reasons, for flavor preference, but I think zero roasting
Mm.
is never really, from my experience, it's not preferred. I think
Flavor wise.
generally you get more experience. Like perhaps there are some fermented beans that you do, but generally speaking.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a really good point. At first, when I started off years ago, I was very anti-raw. But to be honest, I'm a little bit more open about it nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
Not from the sort of, I don't think I should, grab like the beans I use for my regular chocolate. I wouldn't grab those and make raw chocolate from it. But, I have tasted some experimental beans from different countries. People have given me that are, very lightly fermented and not roasted at all. And it was really interesting. So I feel like
Okay.
as things progress, as people try new methods, I think there's potential for it. But I completely understand that for the 99% of cacao people are getting, you kind of have to roast it to really
Mm-hmm.
bring out the flavors. Um,
But I'm
eh,
curious, I think it's a very healthy way to live, to be curious. So I have heard of people doing experiments with unfermented beans, particular varieties and things like this. So I'm open to it, but
mhm,
it's like,
mhm.
it's again, it's a generalization. When I see
Yeah.
people blending raw chocolate with, saying that they've got raw cacao with like a load of coconut sugar, and they're putting all these claims about why unroasted cacao is so much better, when there's various studies that show that when you roast cacao, there's still, it's not a significant effect on the polyphenols and things, like all the health benefits. It's a pet peeve when people are like manipulating it in the wrong way,
Right.
and like putting all these health halos on it, when in
Right.
fact it could be carrying various unhealthy
Mm,
microbiology,
right. Right.
microorganisms. So
Yeah, I think if you go down that path, making raw chocolate, you do have to be more aware of those sorts of things, to make sure um, that it's safe, at different
exactly.
but from just a flavor perspective, a lot of people don't realize that it's the roasting that really develops those flavors, and even the texture, because unroasted beans have more moisture and the texture of
Mm-hmm.
the chocolate's not going to be the same with that added water in there.
Yeah, I'm sure
So
there's a
what do
lot.
you, for people who still want to do that, Do you prefer a different word instead of raw? Would you call it something
Yes,
else?
I prefer unroasted because it
Mm,
is what it is. I
right,
think
right.
raw takes it into a whole different
Mm,
world.
hmm
People
hmm
associate raw with like raw vegetables, and that's
right,
not what it is. It's gone through processes already.
right.
Um, so I
And I think
think
what you're
unroasted is more to the point of what it is.
right. And
And
what
then
you were
Raka
saying,
have said virgin as well, which fair enough, it's their way of saying it.
mm,
But I think
mm,
the word raw just has a like
mm,
it's very misunderstood if you say
right.
associate it. Yeah.
And like you said, there's not a lot of universal standards for raw sometimes too. So it's like, what do you mean by raw exactly? What happened? But also the point that, people think that when you roast cocoa, it depletes it of all its nutrients. And that's not true. A lot of the studies that looked at the effects and levels of antioxidants were based on not even fine craft chocolate, just industrial,
Mm-hmm.
65% chocolate. And it still had really high levels of the flavonols, catechin, epicatechin, things like that. So, it doesn't necessarily mean it's void of nutrition because you roast it. That's not true either. So, yeah,
Yeah.
interesting topic. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Sure, it's many people's pet peeves.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, and so what do you feel is one or some of your ultimate goals in this industry? I know there's not your full-time gig at the moment, but you seem very dedicated to it. So what are you hoping for in the future for what you do? What do you want to sort of improve and see change?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I actually don't spend much time thinking about it,
Mm,
probably a lot less than I should. So it's a really interesting question. Everything that's happened in my craft chocolate journey has been pretty organic, um, which is incredible. Like all of these opportunities have just unfolded as
mm,
I've been passionate and I've spoken to people. And it's the same thing. Taste with Color was quite an organic manifestation. I
mhm,
was realized, oh, something's missing here when I'm tasting. Oh, I'm going to create it. And now I have it in 10 languages, and I never would have imagined that. Um, so I think I, interestingly, haven't been very goal oriented with my chocolate journey. I've kind of
mm,
just gone along with the ride, invested in it, taken opportunities as they came, and
mhm,
rolled with them. So if I think about the future, I think I would really like to see Taste with Color continue to evolve.
mhm.
I don't have tons of free energy to invest in it, and I have been quite passive with it.
Mm,
So if anybody says like any languages because somebody's asked me for it, um, rather than me being proactive, I could be more proactive.
right. Can I
But
ask you quickly about that? When you
yeah,
translate it to different languages, do you have to change the descriptions too?
I choose to change them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I usually work with somebody local and say, often it's like I remove rhubarb because it's not in Japan
Right, right.
or
Yeah,
Thailand
yeah,
or
yeah.
Latin America, and then I start to think,
That's
oh,
really
what
good.
other flavors would be helpful? So
Right.
I try to tailor it. The
Yeah.
Spanish map was the most challenging because we've got
Oh, yeah.
Spain and then we've got
I know Latin
Latin
America and
America.
those are so varied and yeah,
And in
yeah.
Costa Rica, they have fruits that they don't have, in Argentina or
That's a good
so,
point.
or Spain. But I eventually just had to settle on it.
Yeah.
Um, so
No, it's really
yes, I
good.
like to tailor
Hmm.
the flavor
That's
notes
amazing.
to the country. But what happened last year, and again, it was because I was asked, is I did my first corporate event. So I went to a company and ran a Taste with Color workshop as a
Mm,
package.
mm.
So I took a day's holiday of my day job, went to another company who's actually a company I work with quite often, a flavor
Okay.
company. And they'd been chasing me for a year. And eventually I said, okay, I can do it now.
That's awesome.
Um, and and it was great. And I think that is another way of introducing people. And it's another way for me to kind of spread the word about taste with color, and craft chocolate. And it was really interesting doing it with a flavor company because they are sort of expert tasters but know
Right.
nothing about chocolate. And I was like, okay, I actually did a bit of an introduction about what is craft chocolate when I go into places, because it was a place that wasn't chocolate. And I'm so used to doing my events for chocolate people or at with chocolate makers or people that
Hmm.
already knew about chocolate. So that was actually really exciting, and it was
Did
really
it come
positively
easier for them because they articulate these
because they're
things
tasters. It
as their
it was
tasters?
interestingly, they had all had different ways of describing, and I thought that was
Mm,
quite interesting because as a team they need to be aligned on how they describe
mm,
flavors. So it was actually quite eye-opening for them to look
mm,
at how they communicate flavor within themselves,
hmm.
because they were kind of all getting different things from the bars. So
Interesting.
it was very thought-provoking for them,
Huh.
which I think was really useful. So this year I would like to do more corporate events. I think it's a way to tap into other groups of people,
Yeah.
demographics.
No, corporate events are great because a lot of those people would have never done it if their
Yeah.
work didn't organize it.
Yeah. And it's another way to also uh, make it more of a business. I talk
Right.
about craft
Right.
chocolate, people don't make much money. And taste with color is a lot more of a hobby than it is of a
Yeah.
business,
I think we're
right?
too nice. We always want to just give stuff away for
Yeah,
free, but that's not
totally.
realistic.
And
Yeah.
this is a bit of a journey that I'm on now. I've done so many tastings for free, and or to like sometimes I don't even break even, or I might
Right.
break even, or I get it for in exchange for some accommodation, or but
Mm.
I'm going to be more strict with myself now that
Yeah.
I'm not,
You
nobody's
should
helping
be. I
anyone
think,
by doing stuff for free.
yeah. Yeah. No, you should be. I mean, it's perfectly fine, if you want to do that, but you've already proven to the craft chocolate world that they love your tool. People are happy to have it, so you have something there. You should be valuing
Yeah,
it and valuing your time, right? So,
absolutely. So that's another goal
mhm.
which I still saying out loud feels selfish, but I
No,
hope that also
yeah.
by doing it to my, committing to myself with that I'm not going to do stuff for free.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
if friends in the industry are doing something, I want to make sure I'm not expecting it for free, and
Hmm.
I want to support them. And I've
Hmm.
got
Hmm.
friends who have like launched books or make chocolate,
Hmm.
and sometimes people want to chuck in an extra thing in the bag or give me a friend's discount or
Right.
something, and fair enough, but I don't think we should ever expect anything for free from each other, because
Mm.
we need to really undo that message, and
If
we need
we're
to,
if we're gonna tell people to value it, right, we gotta value
yeah,
it ourselves, right?
we have to model it,
Yeah, that's a
and
good
we
point.
should model it with each other in the industry. and
Mm.
and these are some conversations that we were having, at the Northwest Chocolate Festival. We were saying we have to be a lot more strict with ourselves. Like, it's not a charity, and we're actually doing a disservice to everybody if we're doing stuff for free, or if we're selling our chocolate cheaply. We're again
Good
kind
point.
of bringing the
Yep.
standards down and the
Yep.
expectation down. And I know it's so difficult. I've been there when I think, oh, what if people don't buy it because
Yeah.
of it's too expensive? And I've been there when I'm like, oh, shall I do it just for this many people? But I need to be strict with myself. No, this is what I told myself. I'm not
Mm.
doing cheaper. Because then if everybody does stuff for free, people are going to think, oh, it's for free, or it's this price. Or if you do events for cheap because you're not paying yourself, or you're
Hmm.
doing the chocolate for free, again, it's people are going to be conditioned to think this is the price,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then expect those prices again. So that is like more of a general goal, I
But I
think.
think that's such a good point to end on. I think we're just finishing here, but like we talked at the beginning about the price issue and whatnot,
Hmm.
and then ending on this idea of valuing ourselves, whether you're a maker, an educator, whatever
Yeah.
it is. Such a good point.
So
Yeah.
that's an action that we can all do,
Yeah.
like everybody in the industry, is to value yourself and to value the people around you, and
Yeah.
that will like their small contributions. Like, if you want to make a change, you have to start with something small, and their small contributions, small changes that you can make that will hopefully have a wider effect on the industry.
Wonderful. And just before we sign off, how can people connect with you? Where can they go to purchase your Taste with Color sheets?
So I'm probably most active on Instagram, so at Hazel_Choc, which is the easiest way to reach out to me and connect with me. And then Taste with Color, I have again on Instagram at Taste with Color, spelt the British and Canadian way with the
Okay.
U. And then tastewithcolor.com.
Wonderful. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Hazel. It was really fun to talk to you. I really, really enjoyed
Thank
it.
you. I really
I
enjoyed
uh,
it.
I hope you continue with chocolate, and I think you have a lot to offer the chocolate world.
Oh, thank you so much.
All right. Well, all the best. You take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Download the free Bean to Bar app to connect with incredible chocolate makers from around the world. Also, be sure to visit beantobarworld.com, your portal for all things fine chocolate, virtual tastings, free learning resources, research, and much more. Subscribe to the newsletter to stay in touch, and donate to the free app and free resources here. Contact me for any chocolate-related questions you may have.